Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Republican National Committeeman Thomas Wright and former Democratic State Senator Jim DeBackus. Gentlemen, great to have you back on the show. It's like a little Together for Utah reunion here, right?
Absolutely, exactly. Just like the old times.
Yep, just like the old times. And I like the red tie there.
Thank you.
It's a tribute to Rob.
Okay. It's a sign of things to come.
Gotcha.
2020.
Yeah. When you know what freezes over, right? Okay, let's move on to the Salt Lake City mayoral race. What do you make of the final result?
It was fascinating. I mean, there was polls all over the board. Nobody really knew how it was going to come out. And man, at 8:03 or 8:04, Mendenhall was way ahead. And it just spoke to a lot of different things in the race, didn't it, Jim? I mean, you know probably better than anyone sitting here.
Yeah, she ran a great campaign. She organized. She got a lot of people to throw dough in. No, she ran a model campaign.
Let's talk more about those poll numbers because they were kind of all over the place. One had it this close. Utah Policy poll showed it at about 13 points. And Erin, really, when you take a look at even go back into the primary polls, she wasn't registering much, and she came out on top in the primary. What do we make of that?
Well, I think that some polls are done internally and some polls are done by organizations that support candidates. And when that happens, sometimes there's varying results. I hope we can get to a place in our state and in our country where the polling data really is a prognostication of what's going to happen so people can get a feel for the race. But in this particular case, if you look at the different polling numbers that came out ahead of this mayoral election, they were wildly inconsistent. And that can only be attributed to really what I just said.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the race is over, and I think the challenge is going to be, and I wish Erin the best, she's going to have to move from that city council position into an administrative position. And this wasn't just any city council. This is, if not one of the youngest city councils in the history of the city. They've made some major mistakes over the last 4 years. I mean, if you look at that RDA project on 4th South and State, there was $5 million that no seasoned developer would have given away. They just blew it. And the deal they signed on the inland port. So I'm saying they have stuck together as a gang, the city council, and you know they pecked the mayor. Now let's see what happens. I hope that they're mature enough to recognize that they're in different positions and that they'll keep that kind of sisterhood and brotherhood of the city council away from doing things behind closed doors, the way the chumminess of the city council. So that's something to look out for. They have different roles, and the job of the city council is to keep an eye on the mayor and vice versa. So let's see how all that evolves. It's something to keep an eye on.
That was an interesting dynamic in this race. You know, a city councilwoman versus a legislator and the challenges of the inland port and some of the things that have happened between Salt Lake City and the legislature and the partisanship there, obviously, you know, one being blue, one being more red. And it was interesting that people went with the city council person. And I think that was a big part of the race. I also think Erin got out early on some key issues. I think the clean air, her history on the clean air, her getting out ahead of that issue really spoke to how connected she was to that.
And there's another part of that dynamic as well, in that the outgoing mayor got behind Escamilla. We saw that fight between Erin and Mayor Biskupski.
Yeah, and I want to thank Mayor Biskupski for her service. She, you know, anybody who's willing to run and serve has my deepest respect. But it just shows that endorsements aren't always as important as people think they are. When you're a candidate and you're running, you want endorsements because it gives you some sense of safety and security that your message is resonating. But at the end of the day, it's about the voters, and it's about connecting with the voters and the issues that they care about.
Okay, let's move on to another topic, impeachment inquiry. It's moving forward. The first scheduled open hearing set for this week. This process, Thomas, let's start with you. Is it warranted?
You know, my thing with the impeachment is this. We have a constitution. We have rules that we need to follow. We need to protect our institutions of government so that they last far beyond us and the people that are involved right now. Congress is doing a terrible job of addressing the issues that our country faces. The federal government is lost. It's a dumpster fire. It's a food fight. We've got to get back to a place where they're governing and they're legislating, and all this bickering is getting so old for me. It's so old because there's people out there that are suffering. There's people that need help. There's so many issues, right, Jim? And Jim and I have often said if we got together, we could agree on most of the issues and we could solve them. And I wish we could get our Congress to that point.
Do you believe this inquiry and moving forward is warranted?
I think the sooner he's out of office, the better we're going to be. I mean, he's a dumpster fire. On the other hand, what Thomas has said is absolutely true. I worry about whoever is the next president. And I'm trying to think of how that would be balanced besides Trump, but the post-Trump period. How are we ever going to get America out of these camps? I don't think we've been this divided since the Civil War. And I just don't know how. I don't know how we break that down. I don't know how we ever get back together where we're actually talking about solving the country's problems. And I want to tell you something. We've got competitors. The Chinese are prepared economically and in a myriad of other ways to take over leadership of the world. And we do not have the time to be dilly-dallying around with all of these internal fussings and dividing our country, because the world needs the leadership of a free, bold America, and we're frittering it away, and that's a bad
Let's dig
news.
into that a little deeper, though. What are the solutions? Because you guys, we talk about this all the time, and we don't see anything changing.
Well, part of the problem is everybody thinks Congress is the problem, but no one thinks their particular congressman is the problem, right? If you look at the polling. And so what we have to do is we have to hold our individual representatives accountable for how they're behaving and what they're doing to solve these intractable problems. We can't just lump them together. All we can do is control who we vote for and who represents us in our district and maybe even in our state. And so you've got to look at the behavior of that and say, who is going to represent us? Who's going to go to Washington, D.C. and put this partisan bickering aside and start to solve problems? Because this whole era of Congress is all about partisan bickering.
So
that's what it is.
So how would you rate our delegation on doing just that?
They're catastrophe.
All of them?
They're awful. I mean, what if you want to scale? I mean, you have Chris Stewart, who has gone over to the dark side. Whatever Trump does, yes, he did shoot the guy on Fifth Avenue, but blah, 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 blah. To Curtis, who I think is less ideological. I think Ben tries to stay in the middle. So, look, we need a national solution. Right now, it is the extremists in California who are deciding who their congresspeople are going to be, and it's the same is true in a lot of ways in Utah. Somehow we need an independent gerrymandering around the country, and we also need some other little tricky things. I read an article about Congress adjourns now on Wednesday afternoon, and they're not there for the weekends. And there was a time when they were there the whole weekends, and they socialized, and they ate at each other's house, and they talked, and they knew each other, and that led the way in a lot of ways. Can you imagine Mike Lee working around and having a drink with some of his fellow senators? I mean, he's aloof. He's in his own little weird constitutional world, and he's an ideologue to the max. We need to get rid of some of those people, and on the left too. There's people that way.
Thomas, real quick on that.
Well, I mean, I could say a lot about those individuals and what they've done individually, because there's been a lot of great accomplishments by our members of Congress, and we batted way above our weight. And we don't have time to do that right now, but I could do it.
Especially Bishop.
My point in all of this is we've got to demand better of Congress. We have to say, hey, look, your partisan bickering and charades need to stop. We have problems we need to solve.
Okay, real quick. When we take a look at what happened nationwide in 2019, I'm going to have about 30 seconds for both of you. In Kentucky, Mississippi, and Virginia, Democrats had a pretty good night, taking over the assembly in Virginia, the governorship in Kentucky, but Republicans holding on to Mississippi. Is that an omen of what's to come in 2020?
Oh, no. I mean, the Republican in Mississippi was way down, came back and won easily. Kentucky was a different thing. You have to look at the candidates. It was a very moderate mainstream Democrat, could have been a Republican. The Republican came way back when he almost lost the primary. He had a 30% approval rating before the primary, almost came back and won. Virginia's a cyclical thing. Republicans are going to be fine in 2020.
10 seconds, Jim.
Yeah, it was exactly what's going to happen in the presidential election.
All right, well, we will leave it on that
predictable.
note. Hey, gentlemen, great to have you back on the airwaves
Good to
here on
be
NBC4.
here.
Thanks for joining us today.